Chapter 1. How is decision-making researched within the field of neuroscience? Decision-making research in neuroscience requires determining the average activity of groups of brain cells over hundreds of trials. Neurons communicate by sending out quick bursts of noisy electrical signals, which occur amid a flurry of other brain activity. Neuroscience is so important for analyzing decision-making processes that certain researchers refer to decision neuroscience. Decision neuroscience is about finding key decision variables related to certain brain activity parameters. The most important groups of decision variables are 1. Value, 2. Uncertainty. By discovering what effects these variables have on neural decision-making, e.g. measures of brain activity, we can learn how to improve our decision-making processes. The first two are more important for this chapter, which is why we'll focus on them, while the effect of social variables will be discussed elsewhere. While being complex and abstract, neuroscience can also be applied to everyday life. First, let's see the most important findings of decision neuroscience and then discuss how they can be applied to day-to-day decision-making. Value. In decision neuroscience, value means the value of a reward. This can be anything from a physical reward, money, food, to solving a task or attaining a goal. The way you think about the reward also determines your decision-making processes. This is manifested on the neural plan through increased activity in the ventral tegmentum, VT, a subcortical part of the brain. VT activity is often marked by increasing dopamine levels, which sometimes peaks when the reward is attained. I want to emphasize the word sometimes. While dopamine is labeled as a pleasure chemical, things are not that simple. It's been shown that dopamine levels and VT activity are the highest while primates, for instance, are receiving a reward. However, after many trials, the primate's response to the reward itself weakens, while the anticipatory response increases. In other words, dopamine isn't only the pleasure chemical, but it's also the anticipation of pleasure chemical. Why is this important? The answer comes from an unexpected place: psychoanalysis. Why? The difference between dopamine as a pleasure chemical and dopamine as the anticipation of pleasure chemical is analogous to the difference between the concepts of need and desire, which have been at the center of post-Freudian psychoanalysis research. Need involves a certain lacking. You need food because you're hungry. You need sleep because your body and mind have to recharge to become refreshed and alert when you wake up. Desire is different. The things we desire are not necessarily things we strictly need for survival. We desire someone to love. We desire to be someone else. While everything about the concept of need is oriented towards the crucial moment of satisfaction, desire is more about the whole process. While pleasure is often the climax of desire, this doesn't mean that desire is only about pleasure. More so, desire is about anticipation. It's the long months of getting to know a person, and it's the process of attaining a goal. Perhaps this sounds a bit abstract. Essentially, findings from decision neuroscience, coupled with psychoanalytical interpretation, tell us that instead of focusing on satisfaction or sheer pleasure, we should turn our attention to anticipation or desire. Why? Because rewards will only work for so long. As soon as we establish a habit, let's say we've exercised for a month, the rewards we used to gain will lose their allure and intensity. That's not to say that rewards should be disregarded altogether, no, but they shouldn't be the main focus when we make a decision. A YouTuber became popular for, frankly speaking, being an obnoxious adolescent whose only talent revolved around filming himself and others while drinking copious amounts of alcohol. This YouTuber has earned millions of dollars in only a few years, probably much to his own surprise. When asked about his biggest motivator, he was blatantly honest. Money, he said. Rewards obviously drove this man, not so much anticipation. The intensity of the reward he feels from making the big buck will drop soon enough. Often, this is when people turn towards other methods of getting the dopamine high, not necessarily healthy means. In other words, someone with a reward-driven mindset is an instant gratification junkie. Now, let's examine an anticipation-driven example. Most billionaires have a few common psychological traits that help them continue striving for the goals they chose for themselves. They have a vision of the world they'd like to see. Let's take Elon Musk as an example. He's a smart guy who launched many successful businesses and has plenty of money. Did he ever stop creating? No. Because he has a vision of the world he'd like to create and knows that it's hard to revolutionize the world in a few decades, which is at best how much time he has. But he's still working hard, striving, anticipating, desiring. After they have enough money, most wealthy people don't find real satisfaction in monetary rewards. Their need for money has so often been fulfilled that another million won't make a real difference in their dopamine bank. Their motivation comes from a different place. It comes from their ambitions, from the anticipation of realizing their bigger vision. These people are those who can delay gratification. You get the point. Although feeling good in the short run, pleasure-seeking will be detrimental in the long run. The instant gratification-seeking mind only thinks about the present moment, always looking for pleasure. On the other hand, the anticipation-driven mindset can think and plan for future rewards. They're likely to enjoy the process of attaining a reward. To them, the process itself is rewarding. Maybe you don't regard financial status as the indicator of success, which I used in the last two examples. Fair enough. Let's consider two cases coming from the world of art. The stories of Hunter S. Thompson and Lou Reed. Hunter and Reed had quite similar starting points in their early days. Both were drug addicts. Hunter opted for diversity. Lou Reed liked his heroin the best. Both have searched for pleasure in the world of drugs for a long time. It might seem as if Lou Reed was in a more dismal situation. After all, he was a heroin user, while Hunter was more of a gourmet type of drug addict. In 2005, Hunter S. Thompson took his own life. This is what he wrote in the 60s. "We are all alone, born alone, die alone, and, in spite of true romance magazines, we shall all someday look back on our lives and see that, in spite of our company, we were alone the whole way." I do not say lonely, at least not all the time, but essentially and finally alone. This is what makes your self-respect so important, and I don't see how you can respect yourself if you must look in the hearts and minds of others for your happiness. It seems Hunter remained alone until the very end, and it is loneliness that ultimately killed him. Even though one can only speculate what was happening in the mind of Hunter S. Thompson, I believe that the basic pattern in his life followed the satisfaction of needs or instant gratification. This life philosophy can work for some time, but it's untenable. Solving all his problems using the reward pattern, in the end, he was unable to bear the dread of his own existence. A lot of people might have expected the same path for Lou Reed. After all, he was addicted to heroin, the drug king of all rewards. But in 1979, Reed got fed up and quit the drug cold turkey on his own. Reed then lived a normal life, making music, writing books, and taking photographs. Michael Dorff remembers the post-addiction Reed, who was previously known to be somewhat unpleasant and rash. People always said, "He hasn't lashed out at you?" No, he never did. Rather, Reed had a grandfatherly kind of quality to him that made him very warm and almost very huggable. Hunter never realized that his real problem was the instant gratification mindset. He was seeking highs from various sources instead of embracing the essential elements of what it means to be a human, building relationships, expressing creativity, and honing ambition. All these things require patience and often delay gratification. He resorted to empty highs to feel loved, creative, and successful. On the other hand, despite choosing one of the worst drugs, Lou Reed was able to look past instant gratification, maybe because the consistent heroin-induced rewards diminished. Luckily, instead of overdosing, he realized that instantly gratifying his needs made him less and less fulfilled. The more he tried to ignore the abyss of his personality, and the more he tried to fill it with heroin, the bigger it had become. Around 1980, Lou Reed experienced a spiritual revolution. He became more mindful about himself and others, more reflective and considerate. He realized that incompleteness and imperfection are essential characteristics of human existence. Quick pleasure only served to help him ignore this often uncomfortable realization. Lou was also able to grasp the inner paradox of what it means to be a human. Only once you give up the notion that perpetual happiness is possible can you reach actual happiness, this time as a process. This brings us back to the concepts of anticipation and desire that involve being comfortable delaying gratification. Much like happiness, these processes don't have to have a reward at the end to be fulfilling. They are markers of a mindset that can enjoy the very process of living, attaining a reward, desiring, loving, and caring. Why do I tell these stories, and why are they important? Because we're living in the age of satisfaction, where every need we have can be satisfied instantly. What we watch on TV and social media makes us function in a predominantly satisfaction-oriented way. Rolling Stones, back in 1965, knew what was happening when they released their hit single, "I Can't Get No Satisfaction." A human being can never be completely satisfied. But if everything you do in your life revolves around satisfaction, you're in for a ride. Here are the crucial insights based on the neuroscience of decision-making based on value. A. The value of a decision relates either to reward or anticipation, the value of the process. B. Your decisions should be influenced more by the value of the process, not by the value of reward. C. Rewards are not intrinsically bad, but the most important things in the life of a human, love, work, creativity, do not follow the principles of reward mechanism. In these spheres, you have to set your course not according to potential rewards, money, status, pleasure, but according to the value of the whole process of loving, working, and creating. That was quite a long way from decision neuroscience, across psychoanalysis, and over 2 incredibly creative artists' back-to-life philosophy. Decision neuroscience is full of these interesting implementations of and interpretations that are very much relevant in the modern world. Uncertainty. The next decision variable identified in decision neuroscience studies is uncertainty. Uncertainty is intrinsically related to the value of rewards. Rewards that can easily be attained are usually not perceived as valuable by humans, i.e., they don't evoke a powerful dopaminergic response. Impossibly high rewards are also valueless. When our minds can't believe in their attainability, extremely high rewards are associated with friction. There is a sweet spot of uncertainty for all rewards, when the reward is neither certain nor completely impossible. The sustained activity of dopaminergic neurons is the highest when the reward is relatively uncertain. This is how the process of attaining something pleasurable becomes rewarding on its own. Let's take an example. Suppose that you want to learn how to code. Previously, you thought that coding is interesting, but never got to it. Now you decided to step up your game and start learning new things about programming daily. You'd do best to reward yourself only occasionally and after solving relatively challenging problems that you weren't sure you could solve. For instance, you don't take a break after learning a few new functions. You can only take a break after solving a difficult problem. Or you decide that you can order pizza only after a week of hard work. By strategically placing uncertain rewards, you get a dopamine boost that adds to the intrinsic interest in programming. This is how you can use the rewards to increase the activation of dopaminergic neurons while you're still in the phase of anticipation. Another important insight comes from the neuroscience of uncertainty in decision-making. The value of rewards decreases with the increase of delay before a reward is received. This is a crucial finding to unlearn certain associations between a behavior and a reward. For instance, Sam decided to stop smoking. Before, he always went out for a smoke break after 2 or 3 hours of work. rewarding himself with his soothing vice. While Sam should continue taking a break after a few hours of work, he can try to delay the reward, going out for a smoke. For example, he takes a break every 2 hours and chews up the carrot, but he only opens his cigarette pack at the end of the workday, or better yet, he leaves his cigarettes at home. The changed environment and conditions will make the experience of smoking less rewarding. Gradually, Sam can increase the delay of smoking even longer and eventually put it down altogether. We humans attach an intrinsic value to the things we love. This varies across individuals. The greater the value associated with something, the less we care about its uncertainty. What does this mean? Eating a delicious pizza is great, but it isn't a remarkably valuable experience. A great proportion of rewards aren't that valuable, which is why we can play around with uncertainty to make them more alluring. But some things in our lives are of extreme importance, such as vision, ambition, fulfillment. Say that you have a vision to make the world a better place. This cherished vision can turn into an inexhaustible ambition, potentially producing the most sustained and powerful anticipatory response in the brain. It's a bit paradoxical. You know that one person can hardly change the world in a significant way, yet you keep trying. Seemingly, you keep waiting for a reward that may never come. But the story's not that simple. The vision is not about a simple reward. The process of living your vision is rewarding on its own, and this kind of pleasure is something that you can never get from material rewards like money or status. What does this all mean? It means that decision neuroscience, albeit indirectly, shows us that people are most motivated by abstract, non-material things, like having a vision. Idealism is not outdated. Quite the contrary, it's very much alive, and it will remain alive as long as there are humans in this world. Don't be afraid to be an idealist. Strive for something bigger or more important. Find meaning in your life. The most successful people in this world all have an abstract vision, and it's to their vision that they owe their success, not to material rewards. Chapter 2. The role of heuristics in decision-making. We humans do a lot of our decision-making on autopilot to free up cognitive resources for more difficult decisions. How? By using heuristics, or mental shortcuts. As our brains evolved, they created heuristics that are great in, say, 95% of situations. It's that 5% when our cognitive shortcuts can get us into trouble. To mitigate the negative effects of heuristics on our decision-making, first we need to become aware of them. This chapter will show what heuristics are and how to avoid mistakes related to their overuse. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, 1974, are two cognitive scientists who devoted their careers to the research of human decision-making processes. They realized that people make systematic mistakes when given certain tasks. Errors in judgments are at random. They follow specific patterns grouped under different heuristics. Kahneman received a Nobel Prize for furthering this research, the only psychologist to date to receive this award, which is a testament to the importance of Kahneman's and Tversky's findings. Kahneman's Nobel Prize is in economics. There's no such award for contributions to psychology, because his findings help to make sense of how people make financial decisions. Heuristics help solve similar problems with the same solution. They are unconscious and automatic mental shortcuts that allow people to make judgments and solve problems quickly and efficiently. Heuristics are unfairly demonized across literature. They're not inherently good or bad. On the one hand, heuristics make our life easier by allowing us to use a simple set of rules in various situations. We don't need to think about how to type on our computer, brush our teeth, or cross the street. Thanks to this, we can devote our energy and mental capacity to more complex problems that demand more attention and conscious effort. On the other hand, heuristics make our life harder if we use them indiscriminately. They're a double-edged sword. Let's take a closer look at the most common heuristics identified by Kahneman and Tversky. Availability heuristics. Consider the following title of an article published by Al Jazeera News: 16 killed after plane crash in Russia's Tatarstan region. The article later mentions the cause of the accident, engine failure, and the fact that the plane crashed shortly after taking off. Many individuals were injured or killed as the plane hit a parked van when it fell to the ground. Only by reading this article, one's brain may alter its impression of how safe flying is. Why? Because the proof that planes crash is more readily available in one's consciousness. This, in turn, will affect one's future decision regarding choice of transportation method. This is the availability heuristic at work. Even though flying on an airplane is still the safest means of transportation by a long shot, since a plane crash gets plenty of publicity, one may feel flying on planes is unsafe. Consider the shock wave felt by the entire airline sector after the mysterious crash of Malaysia Airlines Boeing. This crash was all over the news, and it influenced the decisions of millions of people worldwide, resulting in diminished profits in the airline industry, at least for a while. What would be a more rational way to integrate the information relating to, say, plane crashes into your decision-making process? Instead of letting news alter your estimation of the probability of certain events, e.g. plane crash, it would be smarter to consider the statistics about all types of crashes. You'll find out that automobile crash-related death is much more likely than dying in a plane crash. It's just that car crashes aren't that lucrative from an impact-seeking news agency's point of view, so they are rarely reported. On the other hand, however rare they are, plane crashes unfortunately involve a lot of deaths and are subsequently more interesting and story-worthy. Two variables determine the effect of availability: recency and frequency. If you read about only one plane crash, frequency, a few years ago, recency, this will weigh less in your decision-making process. But if you're on the lookout for such news and read about a plane-related misfortune every month, frequency, the availability of plane crashes in your brain will be much higher. Your decision will especially be affected if you read a story shortly before traveling by plane, recency. Availability heuristics can influence other life areas. Depression, for instance, can be sustained and perpetuated by availability heuristics. Suppose that Sam went on a date that didn't end quite well a few months ago. People who don't suffer from depression will quickly forget this little mishap and continue searching for the right partner. But depressed people are different. They would remember this incident very well, which in turn will support the following rationale. That date went horribly wrong. I'll never be able to find someone who loves me. I'm a complete loser who'll die alone. People who suffer from depression may be searching for confirmation in past experiences that would prove their worst fears. To counteract such detrimental effects, it could be helpful and useful to backtrack your thinking process in a way that I showed in the last paragraph. Sam's thoughts would look like this on paper. The date went horribly wrong. I'll never be able to find someone who loves me. I'm a complete loser who will die alone. See how Sam's cause-effect thinking is structured? His first statement is possibly true. Perhaps it bears a hint of catastrophizing, another cognitive bias we'll address later, but let's go with it and say that the date was indeed horrible. Fair enough. But how does it lead to the next statement? I'll never be able to find someone who loves me. Well, it doesn't. The two are unrelated. Just because one date went wrong doesn't mean Sam will never find a partner. It only means that he didn't click with this person. Concluding that that date went horribly wrong means I'll never be able to find someone who loves me is irrational. His logic is affected by the recency of the availability of the negative experience he had. Our mood can also affect the availability of certain experiences. Daily, we remember dozens of things we've done before. When feeling unconfident or sad, the availability of memories relating to these mental states increases. If our partner makes us angry, we'll be more likely to remember similar injuries happening in the past. This might make us conclude that our partner only says hurtful things to us and start a big fight over it, or even end the relationship. How can one become more conscious of the availability heuristic? Whenever you feel a strong negative emotion, ask yourself the following question. Am I thinking about these things just because I'm feeling, name the emotion? Another way of getting a hold of one's availability heuristic is intentionally using it in one's favor. People often forget the good things they've done. Instead of letting availability heuristic go against you, use it to increase your self-respect and confidence. How? By increasing the availability of positive memories and things you've done, of course. Hang your diploma on your wall. Put the pictures of your loved ones in your workspace. Recall 5 things you're proud about or what other people compliment you for. Representativeness heuristic. Consider the following description of a fictional person. Travis is a practical man. He started working immediately after finishing high school. He didn't like the prospect of reading books and learning things that seemed irrelevant to his life. He found manual work more rewarding, something he was already close to, as he loved spending time with his father in his workshop. He was born in a rural area and continued living there as he disliked the hectic urban lifestyle. Travis likes having a few drinks with his colleagues who are blue-collar workers. Which statement do you think describes Travis the best? 1. Travis likes playing soccer. 2. Travis likes playing soccer and lives on a farm. You probably went along with statement 2, and you've made a mistake. Travis fits the narrative of someone coming from a rural area. Therefore, you regarded statement 2 as more representative than statement 1, even though statement 1 is more likely to be true. Why? Because the number of soccer players is greater than the population of soccer players who live on a farm. One thing is more likely to be true by itself than 2 simultaneous things. As long as there are soccer players who don't live on a farm, in general, statement 1 would be more likely to be true, despite what we know about Travis. This version of representativeness heuristics nicely shows how our stereotypes affect our judgment. Let's shift to another interesting consequence of the representativeness heuristic. Imagine that you're playing the game of heads or tails. Before you place your stakes, you get to see the outcomes of previous coin tosses. You may think it's probably much more rational to place all your stakes on tails if there have been 6 heads in a row. After so many heads, tails surely must follow. Well, not necessarily. You have a 50% chance to be right. Because of representativeness heuristics, people start believing that probabilities of discrete, unrelated events somehow affect one another. In our example, it may seem as if the 6 heads somehow increase the likelihood of tails over the baseline of 0.5 or 50%. This isn't the case, as one coin toss doesn't affect the next one. The same stands true in roulette or any other gambling game. You cannot learn how to beat the house with certainty, and there's no experience factor, only the complex play of probabilities. Anchoring. Is the percentage of the global population living in extreme poverty greater or smaller than 1.2%? Take some time to think about this. What would be your exact estimation of the percentage of the global population living in extreme poverty? Studies on the anchoring heuristic prove that your estimation will inevitably be affected by the anchor, 1.2%, given in the first statement. This anchor affects your estimation without you realizing it. The truth is, about 9.2% of the global population lives in extreme poverty. Anchoring can work well when the anchor is realistic, but quite often, anchors are purposefully unrealistic and even absurd. The best example would be the pricing of certain premium products like phones. The product's price acts as the anchor for you to estimate its real value. When something has a hefty price tag, your first and natural response is to suppose that the real value indeed holds up to the price tag. Keep this in mind when deciding on your new gadget. Is a phone really worth $1,000 plus? Unsurprisingly, economics and marketing experts are very much interested and vested in anchoring heuristics. A group of marketing experts has found that quantity anchors determine our decisions to opt for multiple unit prices. This is one of the typical techniques retailers use when putting products on sale. Sink and colleagues, 1998, found that multiple unit pricing results in more sales than single unit pricing. They had access to various stores in which they manipulated the prices of paper towels, cereals, candies, canned tuna, etc. First, they discounted the products by up to 33% and compared the new price and the old price. Then, they randomly exhibited the price for single units, e.g., one canned tuna for 75 cents instead of $1, or multiple units, e.g., two canned tunas for $1.50 instead of $2, three canned tunas for $2.25 instead of $3, etc. Multiple unit pricing resulted in 32% more purchases compared to single unit pricing. The researchers hypothesized that the quantity anchor could explain this difference, even if the customer needed only one unit. Seeing the discounted price for multiple units made them more likely to buy more products. It must have seemed like a better deal. Keep this in mind next time you go on a shopping spree. Make a list of the products you're going to buy before entering a store. This will help you avoid the influence of anchors. Their main purpose isn't to give you a better deal, but to increase the sales and profits of the company. Will you really eat 10 yogurts within a week? Anchoring can be quantity limiting as well. Sink et al., 1998, have found that people are likely to buy more units when the quantity of the purchasable units per customer is limited, e.g., maximum 12 units per customer. People who saw the discounted price tag for a can of soup without any quantity limiting bought 3 cans of soup on average. Those who saw the discounted price and the quantity limit, 12 units per customer, bought 7 cans on average. There's a very similar phenomenon that we could witness at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, panic buying. Toilet paper hoarding, anyone? The only difference was that in early 2020, quantity limits were not only imposed by retailers, but they were also very much evident. Empty shelves induced panic in customers who started believing they wouldn't be able to obtain what they wanted in the long run. As discussed later, some researchers refer to this type of behavior as influenced by the so-called scarcity heuristic. Sink et al., 1998, believe that customers can battle against anchors imposed by retailers, external anchors, by making their own internal anchors. This recommendation is identical to the one I've given you at the start of this section, where I talked about overpriced phones. The value chosen by the retailer might not be the value you ascribe to a product, or, put differently, external anchors don't have to be the same as your internal anchors. Making a buying list functions very much like a set of internal anchors, primarily when you specify how many units of each product you're going to buy, or you can anchor internally that you won't buy a phone for more than $500. You may need to buy used phones or older models to meet this anchor. Indeed, Sink and colleagues found that internal anchors are useful and can positively affect your purchasing decision. Scarcity heuristic. I already mentioned panic buying as an example of scarcity heuristics. Let's explore other examples. Black Friday is the festival of scarcity heuristics. This shopping phenomenon involves the estimation of a product's value and desirability according to its relative unavailability. A product can be hard to obtain because other people want to buy it too, and the logical conclusion is that it must be good because other people are also buying it. This is why Black Friday isn't only about getting a good deal, it's more about being afraid of missing a good deal. And, perhaps even more so, it's about not letting others get a good deal while you're sitting at home minding your business. It often doesn't really matter whether you need all those discounted products. They'll be useful at some point, better get them at a good price. Let's take a slightly different example, Bitcoin. The fact that its quantity is limited makes people value it more. Folks are rushing to buy more of the virtual good before it stops being mined, contributing to its value by doing so. The bottom line is, question the decisions of the mass. Don't do something just because others are also doing it. However, don't be an anti-conformist either. It's much better to be an independent thinker and decision maker. Be ready to reject the unreasonable actions of the masses, but Also, be ready to accept them if they're sound. Recognition heuristic. What city has more inhabitants? Berlin? Novosibirsk? You've probably opted for Berlin, even though you've never even heard about Novosibirsk, and therefore you cannot be completely certain that your choice is right. If this is the way you were thinking, be certain that you used recognition heuristics. The general principle of recognition heuristic is if an entity A is recognized, whereas entity B isn't, then entity A is more likely to have a higher value than B with respect to a certain criterion. You can probably infer how marketing agencies employ recognition heuristics worldwide. Even though retailers, economists, and marketing experts know that ads are extremely annoying to most consumers, they continue investing loads of money in advertisement. And this is not simply to let you know that a product exists. It's much more about activating your recognition heuristic once you start choosing between several options. Recognition heuristic is probably the main reason why people loathe eating at McDonald's or other recognizable fast food brands when they go abroad. Compared to most other heuristics, the recognition heuristic is more benign, meaning that it's somewhat less likely to result in detrimental decisions. Apart from its utilization in advertisements, it's not easy to find ways in which it can make our everyday life harder. Simulation heuristic. Perhaps you've noticed that recognition heuristic is similar to availability heuristic. Indeed, they both involve retrieving information from memory. A similar heuristic relates to a construction or simulation of events in the mind. The basic idea of the simulation heuristic is that the ease with which a situation is imagined, simulated, affects our choices and decisions. Let's take a very relevant example, the COVID-19 pandemic. In January 2020, the world was still ignorant of what would come just a few months later. In January, most of the global population was still recuperating from celebrating New Year's Eve. Everything was all right. We were free to roam everywhere, and the notion of a virus ravaging the city of Wuhan didn't make the screens in our living room. One of the reasons why the COVID-19 pandemic brought such shock and chaos is that in January 2020, most people couldn't imagine living with lockdowns, masks, travel restrictions, and toilet paper scarcity. It was simply unimaginable, despite the growing evidence that the virus was indeed getting to spread into the world. What's the most important takeaway from this? Be open-minded to change. Peculiar things happen, even though we can't visualize them through mental simulation. The things that we try not to think about the most are the ones that should interest us the most. One of the reasons people find themselves in extremely precarious situations is that they don't want to think about worst-case scenarios. Thinking and planning for worst-case scenarios is not the same as catastrophizing. Catastrophizing is an inflated emotional response that assumes a high probability of the worst-case scenario happening. Instead of doing that, simply imagine the worst-case scenario and what you can do to minimize its likelihood. Recognize your unconscious bias. Due to unconscious biases, we judge before we really give ourselves a chance to get to know something. And because our judgment is already clouded, we might even go looking for signs to justify our thinking. Confirmation bias. But if we get into the habit of challenging our thinking, we'll make better, more impartial decisions. First, you need to understand when and why they are most likely to pop up to manage biases. In other words, what triggers them. Many things can trigger unconscious biases. The following list from Enact Solutions is by far not complete, but it can give you an idea of what to look out for. Ambiguous evidence, highly emotional state dominated by stress, anger, frustration, or fear, cognitive overload, decision fatigue, emotional and cognitive depletion, fatigue, low blood sugar, being in a rush. How to avoid acting on biases? It's not an easy task, and one definitely can't do a perfect job when it comes to eradicating bias-prone thinking. There are, however, some things we can do to reduce the number of our bias-tainted decisions. Recognize we all have bias. Stop and think. Learn to mistrust your first impressions. Don't ignore differences. Be curious. Challenge negative assumptions and stereotypes. Don't consciously try to suppress bias. Don't be too hard on yourself. The emotional impact makes bias more likely. Seek positive examples and role models. Have fun. Keep processes simple. Schedule demanding cognitive or emotional work away from people decisions. Tea and biscuits. Measure levels of trust, openness, and honesty. Pause. Pausing before allowing our fast, bias-prone thinking to take over is always a good idea. Pause, an acronym coined by Howard J. Ross in his book, Everyday Bias, discusses the need for constructive uncertainty to help overcome the risks from our fast, reflexive biases. Ross points out that today we place too much emphasis on finding certainty. This is a futile attempt, as most things in life are uncertain. It's better to embrace the inevitability of uncertainty while practicing conscious thoughtfulness. We need to be able to pause and evaluate the circumstances we're in, says Ross. Pause summarizes this idea. P, pay attention to what's happening beneath the judgment. Event versus interpretation. A, acknowledge or identify your reaction, interpretation, and judgments. U, understand other possible reactions, interpretations, and judgments. S, search for the most constructive, empowering, or productive way to deal with the situation. E, execute your action plan. Act consistently with what makes the most sense. Monitoring and overcoming unconscious biases to make better decisions is a journey, not a destination. Be patient with yourself. You will make mistakes, but you'll make fewer and fewer, and that's a great achievement. Chapter 3, Distractions. Imagine this scenario. Jane has just been assigned an important project at work. It's intimidating, but she knows she can pull it off quickly and satisfactorily if she puts her mind to it. The next day, she sits down in front of her computer and begins formatting an outline to follow as she progresses. It's looking good. Things are moving along nicely. Suddenly, Jane hears the chime of a notification ring out from her phone. She picks it up to see what it is. A friend with whom she has dinner plans later that day sent her a message. The friend, Sarah, got an intense craving for sushi instead of the previously agreed Italian food. She wanted to see if Jane would mind eating sushi instead. After going over the menu, Jane agrees. She then puts down the phone and resumes her work. What was she doing again? She can't remember what she was typing about anymore. She goes back to reread her preceding work and, oh, that's right, she remembers now. She reorients herself and continues the project. When Jane reaches a particularly difficult section in the assignment, she has to sit back and problem solve, but as she turns over ideas in her mind and weighs different options, her favorite song starts to play on the stereo. She can't help but hum along with the melody. She begins to reminisce about when she saw the group in concert several years ago. She hopes they have a new album coming out soon, as it's been a few years since their last one. Come to think of it, she's not seen in a while the shirt she brought from the merchandise table at that show. Did she lose it? She shakes her head and snacks herself back to reality. This is not important right now. She tries to regain her train of thought, but it's disappeared. She's forced to go back and reestablish the context of the problem and put herself back in the right headspace. She glances at the time and realizes that half the day is already gone, and she's not gotten nearly as much done as she'd hoped. This is an example of the impact distractions can have on our focus and productivity. This chapter will provide insight into how distractions affect the brain, our decision-making, and daily life, and how to mitigate these effects. The control network. The control network in our brains is designed to help us filter out unwanted and unnecessary information or stimuli that will negatively affect the decision-making process. It suppresses the default network and keeps us focused. This has the effect of improving reaction time and reducing the likelihood of making mistakes. The control network is the cause of what is known as a flow state, or a period of sustained focus and productivity. It's also the reason, despite what some may believe, that we are ineffective multitaskers, as the control network prefers to zero in on a single task or decision rather than multiple tasks simultaneously. Typically, multitasking makes a person inefficient at both tasks rather than getting them done quickly and accurately. Good decision-making is based on using only pertinent information and ignoring distractions by allowing the control network to do what it's made to do. However, the control network is imperfect and can be undermined or overwhelmed by distracting influences. Irrelevant information sneaks in and muddies the water, preventing us from acting quickly. Impossible to ignore stimuli swoop in and steal our focus away from the task at hand. This can be seen in situations such as a constant barrage of emails and phone calls preventing someone from focusing on their actual job, or a person stopping to browse the internet while they work, which divides their attention. Such distractors disrupt the effective function of the control network and lead to a slower, more error-prone decision-making process. Distractions in the brain. Distractions, and their effect on us, are most often described under the assumption that during decision-making, factors irrelevant to the present situation are not filtered out during our thinking process. Therefore, these factors negatively impact our ability to reach optimal conclusions. They cause conflicting sensoromotor responses, competing with our targeted decisions, resulting in lower response times and increased error rates. Multiple theories have been developed to explain how our brains have evolved to combat these competing distractors to increase our response time. One successful neurocognitive theory suggests that a processing system has evolved in the medial prefrontal cortex specifically to detect these conflicts and then mobilize various control mechanisms to help mitigate these negative events. Another view proposes a different approach, in that the focus is instead shifted to determining how to reach the target instead of how to remove the competing distractions. The narrow pathways that lead us towards our decisional goal receive the sharpest tuning, providing more sensitive outputs. Thus, our brains are allocating effort towards reaching the target over hampering the competition. Mitigating distractions. Removing as many distractions as possible from our life and training our minds to be less susceptible to them will allow us and our control network to function at the peak of our capability and lead to better and more deliberate choices. Humans are creatures of habit. By restructuring our internal patterns and external environment, we will create a more productive and efficient mental space for making decisions. One of the best ways to keep our focus sharp is by living a healthy lifestyle. A high-quality diet, regular exercise, and a proper amount of sleep do wonders to keep our brains operating well. Planning our meals for the week, going for a walk or a run to get our heart pumping and keep our mind and body refreshed, establishing a routine for going to bed so our body knows when it's time to shut down for the day, will all enhance the quality of our focus. Effective decision-making requires energy, and healthy living is the best way to guarantee that. Creating a schedule or a process is another useful method for lessening the impact of distractions and getting ourselves in the right frame of mind. If we divide our day into smaller tasks, prioritize them by their importance, and designate an amount of time to get them done, it is much less likely that something will catch our attention and pull us away. Breaking down our day in this way keeps the scope of the decisions narrow and the possible distractions manageable. The less complicated the issue is, the better our mind can focus on problem solving. Another major step is to have an environment that lends itself to concentration and eliminates as many distractions as possible. These can include turning off or silencing our phones before we begin our tasks, informing our family, friends, and co-workers that we will be unavailable for a certain period during the day, and relocating any potentially distracting objects and pictures to a different room. Taking these precautions will create a space for our control network to take charge and shut out the noise. Finally, it's important to practice mindfulness when our mind starts to wander. Our thoughts are the one distraction that is impossible to get rid of, but their effect can be greatly reduced if we teach ourselves to notice that our focus has drifted and reorient ourselves to get back on track. Over time, this way of thinking will become more natural, and our mind will not be as prone to distractions. Conclusions? Distractions are a constant source of inefficient and mistake-filled decision-making, and our brains are only partially able to control their effect on our thought processes. It's important to understand the mechanisms that allow us to focus and filter out distractions, create an environment that facilitates these mechanisms, and train our minds to capitalize on them. Chapter 4. The role of emotions in decision-making. Reason is often treated as the opposite of emotions. We view the former as logical and analytical, while the latter is seen as impulsive and subjective to the current mental state. Frequently, it's assumed that carefully calculated reasoning is required to save us from making quick, rash decisions fueled by our emotions. However, we often overlook scenarios where our emotional impulses dominate our decision-making, and for good reason. A classic example is our fight or flight response. Our fear, elicited from a perceived danger, allows for a snap decision to either stand our ground and fight or flee from the threat. Taking time to analyze the situation and learn all the facts may prevent a timely response, potentially leading to bodily harm or even death. Incorporating emotions instead of suppressing them allows us to optimize our decision-making abilities. There are many scenarios where it is impossible to know all the facts. Either they are unavailable or the situation is too complex. In these situations of ambiguity, it's been observed that we prefer an intuitive approach when reaching a decision, choosing to trust our gut. Time constraints are another example when using one's intuition leads to a decision, such as the example previously mentioned, where one is in imminent danger. However, choosing between reasoning or emotions should not be an either-or situation when determining our course of action. An integrated approach allows for the facts surrounding a situation and our own feelings to be combined, allowing for the most optimal decision. The somatic marker hypothesis was developed as a neurobiological theory to help explain how emotional processes guide or bias our behavior and decision-making. This theory indicates that emotions manifest as bodily states in response to the presented decision and the different options for behavior. An example would be a rapid heartbeat and perspiration in response to an option perceived as disadvantageous. There's an interplay between the neural systems causing these bodily states and the neural systems that map them, which creates these somatic markers in response to our emotions surrounding the decision at hand. Multiple studies have been conducted to portray the significant role emotions play when making rational decisions. They primarily focus on patients who have damaged parts of their orbital and medial prefrontal cortex, and patients with injury or disease involving their amygdala. Let's go over an example. A patient was known to suffer from a rare recessive condition called Urbach-Wietz disease, which leads to bilateral calcification and atrophy of the anterior medial temporal lobes. Therefore, the amygdala is also extensively damaged due to its location in the hemispheres. The patient was shown to have no motor or sensory impairment or deficits in intelligence, memory, or language function. However, she was found to be unable to recognize the emotion of fear. She had a limited concept of fear and was unable to recognize fear in facial expressions. She also had a limited ability to experience fear in situations where it was warranted. While having no fear may seem like an advantage, living without fear deprives us of appropriate social behaviors and making advantageous decisions in critical scenarios. How to modulate our response? Our innate emotions have an important impact on our motivational characteristics, directing our actions along an approaching or avoiding pathway. These will dictate explorative decision-making and whether an individual will push forward towards new discoveries or remain content with their current outcomes. A good example of this is someone in a manager position of a company. A manager with high confidence may be inclined towards the approach pathway, wishing to grow their business. At the same time, another individual in the same position may follow the avoidance pathway to keep their business stable. Emotions can affect our motivations in other areas of life as well, especially when combined with different environmental and social factors. These can lead to risky behaviors, potentially causing bodily harm. Regarding sexual relationships, having strong emotions for someone, coupled with sexual arousal, can lead to heat-of-the-moment activities without regard for personal safety. For instance, acting on emotions could lead to inconsistent condom use, increasing the risk of contracting HIV or other STIs. An important modulating effect on decision-making is the presence of others. This can be strongly influenced by both the characteristics of the individual and the group mates, including social status, familiarity, sex, and social relationships amongst the group members. Expressed behavioral differences between individuals who are otherwise similar in terms of age, size, and sex can play a particularly influential role in individual decision-making. These are called personality types or coping styles. An example of this is seen when comparing bold and shy individuals, where the former will be more resistant to changes in their social environment or their partner's behavior, and are more likely to display traits in leadership. In particular, those who are more inclined to take up leadership positions will therefore determine group decisions, impacting themselves and people around them. This can lead to social behavioral clashes. The individual in charge may feel emotionally inclined towards one decision based on their own perceptions, which may not match how others have approached the situation. The role of emotions in decision-making can be divided into two influence categories. The first is called expected emotions, which involves making predictions regarding the emotional consequences of decision outcomes. Models have been developed to explain this influence, portraying the theory that people attempt to predict the emotional consequences of potential action courses. Afterwards, they can select the action to maximize their positive emotions and minimize their negative emotions. An example of this can be an investor who is considering their choices. They could move some of their savings into a risky, high-tech stock fund, so they might try to predict the probabilities for different accounts, including losing or gaining their money and how they would feel in each scenario. If their investment takes a dive, will they feel extreme regret, or is it an acceptable risk? If the risk and the pain associated with it is too great, they might be dissuaded from transferring the funds. This is an example of expected emotions. The individual has not experienced the emotion directly, but is expecting to experience it if a specific decision leads to an unwanted outcome. The second type of influence is immediate emotions, which are the emotions experienced when making a decision. This can further be divided into direct impact and indirect impact. Direct impact is when an immediate emotion leads to a decision or behavior. And indirect impact is when the experienced emotion alters the decision maker's expectation of the probability or desirability of future consequences, or it alters the way that the consequences are processed. An example of this is the conflicted investor. In terms of direct impact, the prospective investor could experience feelings of anxiety over the possibility of shifting their savings to the high-tech stock fund, which could deter them from investing in the risky stock. In terms of indirect impact, the individual's mood when the decision was presented, for instance, cheerfulness, may make them feel more optimistic about the prospective increase in funds or excited about the gratifying uses of extra profits. It could also increase their ability to ignore regret if the funds dropped in value. These factors may influence them to throw caution to the wind and transfer the funds. While it is possible that emotionally influenced motivations can lead to potentially harmful outcomes, this doesn't mean that they should be completely shut off or ignored. Instead, it's important to regulate emotions to modulate subsequent responses. In a highly emotional state, we need to give ourselves some time to calm down and think with a clearer mind. Taking a few deep breaths will help to lower our heart rate and bring more oxygen to our brain. Giving ourselves this time will help us combine reasoning with our emotions to optimize our decision. Putting feelings into words calms the amygdala and opens up possibilities. The process of decision-making involves a complex system of neural processes working together. One area of the brain involved in these processes is the amygdala, which regulates our emotions. The amygdala plays an important role in our innate fear response, keeping us safe from imminent danger. Bilateral damage to the amygdala has shown to have a significantly negative impact on decision-making, impacting an individual's ability to maintain employment, stable interpersonal relationships, and refrain from inappropriate social behaviors. A study conducted in 2007 used functional magnetic resonance imaging to examine the effect of verbalizing emotions on amygdala response. The act of putting our feelings into words is referred to as affect labeling. The results from the imaging showed that affect labeling decreases the amygdala's response to negative images, which can help us regulate our negative experience and contribute to better mental and physical health. It was also observed that damage to the amygdala could inhibit our automatic response to emotional stimuli, including reward or punishment. Consequently, individuals with impaired amygdala cannot utilize somatic marker type cues to guide their future decision-making. Differences in laterality of amygdala functioning in sexes have also been observed, where right amygdala damage results in greater deficits in decision-making and social behavior in men, while left amygdala damage was observed as more detrimental to women. The amygdala has been observed to be part of our impulsiveness, triggered by our emotional response to immediate outcomes. Cognitive health benefits are associated with a technique called mindfulness meditation. It originates from ancient Buddhist teachings, where individuals notice their present thoughts, emotions, and sensations without judgment before bringing their attention back to a focal point, usually the breath. A study examined combining neuroscience with these teachings and found that being mindful of one's current thoughts and emotions allows the amygdala to be turned down. Increasing one's mindfulness is shown to improve mood and overall health. Take your time. When it comes to decision-making, our emotions play a vital role in the overall process. The key to incorporating our emotions is timing. Often, allowing ourselves time to sit and process information will result in a better solution. Also of note, while it is important to listen to our emotions, especially if they're tied to core values, we should not make decisions when experiencing intense emotions. Allowing time to incorporate cognitive reasoning helps to prevent decisions we could later regret. A great example of this is seen in a study from 2010, where participants played an ultimatum game. In the study, player A offers a portion of $10 to player B. If player B accepts the offer, both players receive the suggested amount. But if player B rejects the offer, neither receive anything. Low offers from player A were always rejected by player B if they answered immediately. However, if player B was forced to take 10 minutes before responding, acceptance increased to 75%. In these scenarios, brain studies have shown that when player B receives a low offer, their anterior insula is activated, associated with feelings of disgust and anger. Therefore, allowing some time to pass, the activity in the anterior insula decreases, and player B can reach a logical decision, even though they were initially insulted. It is easier to conclude that some money is better than none with calmed emotions. Emotions are complex. The factors that influenced our decisions today will differ if we'd chosen to complete that task tomorrow. The neural activity that occurs in the brain before a decision is carried out, and the confidence in it is extensive, but can be mapped out. One study in 2017, using monkeys as their subjects, were able to determine the decision-making model that suggests people and animals make decisions based on an accumulation of evidence during a trial is wrong. Instead, an alternative model was supported that suggested that a subject with enough confidence in a decision they have built in their mind or have spent a significant amount deliberating will be less inclined to consider new evidence that could alter their perception. This demonstrates how drastically different individuals can be in decision-making. Factors influencing one person today may be different than those influencing another, leading the two to reach different conclusions in their mind, despite encountering the same situation. Chapter 5, Free Will and Willpower. Free will is a difficult and nebulous concept to discuss. Some would say that it's a fundamental aspect of the human experience and is ever present in all moments of our lives. Others contend that free will is an illusion, that the inescapable nature of cause and effect renders our choices to be preordained and immutable. But while such philosophical conundrums are certainly fascinating, an unequivocal answer to the nature of free will is likely impossible to reach or even define in a way that can be agreed upon. The mechanisms that govern our sense of free will and our decision-making process are much more concrete, and how our perception of free will influences our relationship with choices. It is in this way that free will and willpower are intertwined. Generally speaking, willpower is the measure of a person's ability to restrain their immediate impulses and desires to achieve a better long-term result. Things like choosing not to eat that snack we're craving because our physical health and appearance are more valuable, or choosing not to stay up late to finish a movie because otherwise we'll be tired and unmotivated the next day, are both examples of willpower at work. Willpower is often described as a limited resource that can be depleted, but it can be strengthened over time through practice, like any other skill. Willpower serves to help us make more rational and worthwhile decisions overall. If we have a strong belief in our agency over our lives, we tend to have a more positive relationship with decision-making and problem-solving. If we believe we're masters of our own fate, willpower becomes easier to nurture and maintain. This chapter explores the mechanisms behind these concepts and how they affect our decision-making. Readiness potential. When the time comes to make a decision, the first step in the process is considering the available information and making a conscious choice before enacting that decision, right? Well, according to experiments conducted to measure the brain's electrical activity during decision-making, this may not actually be the case. Subjects were observed to have elevated brain activity ranging up to 1,500 microseconds before they reported having made the decision to act, suggesting that what we interpret as a conscious choice may, in actuality, be the result of involuntary, unconscious impulses. These electrical signals can even be used to predict when the subject will act and become aware of the decision to take action. This may suggest that our brains make and enact decisions entirely autonomously, without engaging the conscious portion of our minds. Then the conscious portion is informed after the fact and left to contextualize those decisions. These unconscious signals are known as the readiness potential. Intention. Our recollection of the intent to act is greatly influenced by the results that occur after having acted, to the extent of creating false memories, attributing failed inhibitions to purposeful decisions, and even altering our perception of time. This arises from the way our brains process cause and effect, as well as our reaction time. In experiments regarding intention, the subjects pressed a button and were presented with an audible tone that was delayed until slightly after the button press occurred. Upon later questioning, the subject's recollection of the moment they made the choice to push the button was moved later in time in their memory to more closely correspond with the sound they heard, despite that not being what was objectively true. Furthermore, when tested with a game that rewarded points for responding to certain displayed images with a button press, but penalized for presses during a stop signal, subjects reported intentional button presses which, due to the nature and speed of reaction time and the observed electrical signals, could only be explained by a failed or absent decision to interrupt the action. Their conscious intent was being informed retroactively by the results of the unconscious choices. This suggests that our intention and free will are not as reliable or under our conscious control as we may want to believe. Free will and choice. Studies have been done in less existential arenas regarding the role of free will in our lives, specifically about how our beliefs concerning free will directly correlate with how we think and feel about a choice. Free will tends to be associated with the ability to make choices on our own terms without coercion, following our own values, and with elevated levels of thought and deliberation. People that hold a strong belief in free will tend to favor being faced with decisions. They associate choice with freedom, and the more their actions are seen as meaningful choices, the more they feel like they are exercising their free will. Those who think this way tend to be more confident in their decisions and do not perceive having a hard time making those decisions. Being presented with more options affirms and reinforces their belief in free will. Contrast this with those who have a propensity towards a more deterministic worldview. They tend to have a lower degree of enjoyment and appreciation when being presented with multiple choices. They're also far less confident in the results of those choices. It is even hypothesized that those with a lower level of belief in free will may be using this stance to distance themselves from the consequences of their actions. How could something be their fault if it were an inevitable result of factors beyond their control? Ultimately, free will and our beliefs and relationships surrounding it stem from our desire for control. It appears to be an innate belief in most people, as their belief in free will does not lessen even when the choices before them are limited. Choice represents freedom and power, and a strong belief in free will reinforces the idea that we are the masters of our own fate. Willpower. I will, I won't, and I want. Willpower is another difficult concept to define neatly, but we can think of it as the ability to resist our baser impulses to better serve future goals. It serves many purposes, ranging from improved personal well-being to stronger and happier social relationships to greater overall success and wealth. It's an even better predictor of success and happiness than a person's intelligence. For example, for individuals to survive 100,000 years ago, they needed to meet their basic needs, including finding food, avoiding predators, and reproducing. The greatest chance to do all the above for these individuals was living in a tribe that allowed for a larger group with the same goal, survival. However, stealing another's food or partner would not have occurred without consequence. This is an example of where self-control is a necessity for self-preservation, which served us well in the evolution of our species. An experiment was done in recent years looking at self-control among children. The participants were preschoolers, and they were presented with a plate of marshmallows. They were instructed that the researcher had to leave the room for a few minutes, and if the child could wait until their return, they could have 2 marshmallows. However, if the child could not wait, they could ring the bell, and the researcher would return immediately but give them only 1 marshmallow. It was observed years later that the children who had waited for the second marshmallows were faring better in life. Willpower consists chiefly of 3 main principles. The first is the I will power, meaning the ability to persevere and complete a difficult, uncomfortable, or boring task. Second is the I won't power, which is the ability to resist the temptation to indulge in an activity or vice that is appealing in the moment. Last is the I want power, which refers to keeping our true goals and desires in mind in the face of temptation and instant gratification. Our prefrontal cortex has expanded drastically throughout human evolution to increase our capacity for personality, impulse control, and social intelligence. It's responsible for controlling these aspects of willpower. The upper left part of the prefrontal cortex is the I will portion. The right handles the I won't responsibilities, and the lower middle section houses the I want desires and keeps our goals in mind. The prefrontal cortex is in a constant battle with the more primitive parts of our brain, such as the hippocampus, the hypothalamus, and the amygdala, where our hard-to-ignore impulses come from. When the prefrontal cortex has been damaged, severe personality changes have been observed as the victim no longer has these critical systems in place to suppress impulses. The prefrontal cortex can even be strengthened and enlarged over time through meditation to achieve better impulse control. Applications in life. So now that we know more about how the brain functions, how do we apply what we know to improve our lives? Free will and willpower are two of the most vital characteristics of being human, so it is important to maximize their potential. Our decision-making will greatly improve by strengthening these aspects of ourselves. While the answer to the true nature of free will might be impossible to reach, our relationship to it still frames every moment of our life. We can relish the choices in front of us, even if they are difficult. After all, it is a gift that we have the freedom to choose. Our relationship and understanding of free will directly correlate with how confident in our decisions we will be. The more optimal decisions we make, the more confidence and belief will grow. It's a positive feedback loop. As for willpower, there are several methods we can use to increase its efficacy. Self-awareness is an important part of the process. If we make a conscious effort to avoid making decisions on autopilot, we'll be much more aware of the poor choices we make throughout the day and when and how we surrender to temptation. Meditation is a useful tool in our arsenal. Over time, it's been shown to increase cortical thickness, which does wonders for our attention span, focus, self-awareness, stress management, and impulse control. Physical exercise and a healthy diet have been shown to positively affect willpower, our well-being, and most aspects of our brain function. Relaxation is another important maintenance tool. Stress makes us more likely to give in to temptations to soothe the pain with an easy solution, so taking time to de-stress is paramount. Finally, it's important to be kind to ourselves. It may be our initial instinct to be angry if our resolve slips and we make a mistake, but that only leads to more stress and more unhealthy indulgence. Treating ourselves well is the most important part of getting back on track. Free will and willpower are some of the most powerful resources we have available to improve our decision-making abilities. If we manage these well, the quality of our decisions will shoot way up, and we will be far happier overall. Chapter 6. Should we or should we not rely on our gut feelings? Have you ever got the strange sense that something was off in your stomach while you were driving on the highway, and then a few miles down the road you saw a police car hiding behind the bush? Perhaps you turned down an invitation because you couldn't shake the feeling that going would end poorly. Your gut was trying to warn you that something was amiss. One of my strongest memories of this occurring happened when I was involved in youth soccer as a child. Tryouts for the older children in the program were held every year, and the best players were taken onto the A and B teams. Everyone else who was left over would be gathered onto the C team. Needless to say, the C team wasn't very good. The first year I tried out, this was the team I found myself on. I thought I'd performed well enough at the tryout, but I didn't make the cut in the end. The C team didn't win a single game that season. When the time came again for tryouts the next year, I remembered the intense pressure I felt and the frustration and disappointment that resulted from the experience. I decided to skip the tryout this time around. However, it didn't end there. My parents and I received a phone call in the following days from the coach of the B team. He told me that they missed seeing me at the tryout and that they were hoping that a player of my caliber was not leaving the league. He invited me to join the B team, bypassing the tryout entirely. I was ecstatic. This was my chance to finally play on a team with players I felt could give me a fighting chance to finally win, but something felt wrong. The entire time leading up to our very first practice, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing a crucial detail, that something was fishy about the whole thing. I felt like I had a sour knot twisting in my stomach. My gut was adamant that something was not right. When the first practice finally arrived, my gut's nagging was confirmed to be legitimate. The other players that were arriving were all my old C team teammates. we'd all receive the same phone call and bed-fed the same lines. To this day, I don't know if there weren't enough players to fill the B team's roster that year, or if it was a misguided attempt to boost our self-esteem, but either way, at the time I knew I'd been tricked. The B team didn't win a single game that season. So what caused my gut to be so insistent that something was wrong? These gut feelings can feel like magic or even precognition when it happens. Obviously, in reality, this is not the case. There are myriad reasons that our intuition tells us what it does and creates these instinctual feelings that are seemingly pulled from the ether. Let's talk about how that happens. The gut-brain connection. Before we get into how intuition works, let's discuss why it seems to affect us physically. Upon reflection, it seems strange that a cognitive process can cause physical symptoms such as nausea and butterflies, but there's actually a physical connection between our central nervous system and our enteric nervous system, ENS, that closely ties these seemingly disparate systems together. In growing literature, it's been observed that actual visceral sensory stimulation engages different regions of the brain called the insula, INS. For instance, activation of the mid-INS and interior INS is seen with gut distension in healthy individuals. However, activation of the anterior INS has also been observed when we expect visceral pain, example, stomachache, supporting the belief that specifically the anterior INS is also involved in processing interoceptive memories. Activation of the anterior INS has been reported in individuals experiencing disgust without the signal from the gastrointestinal tract, also indicating nausea. This suggests that the anterior INS can be triggered without the interoceptive input, primarily based on recalling memories while imagining a specific state of feeling, i.e., nausea, pain, hunger, etc. The formation of these memories related to the complex gut-related states is not entirely understood, but they're thought to have been encoded during development. For example, when a newborn experiences pleasure from food intake when hungry. These initially gut-based responses may be the basis for the development of interoceptive brain-based memories of basic emotional states, which can then be applied in later stages to more complex social situations, influence our predictions for the future, and intuitive decision-making abilities. Exploring these ideas further, a study was conducted called the Iowa Gambling Task, where subjects were told to choose between decks of cards to win money. The choices were 2 good decks that would result in repeated profit and 2 others that contained riskier cards. The subject's skin was monitored for responses to stress. It took about 50 cards for the subjects to decide to switch decks and 80 cards to explain why. The physical reaction on the skin was seen after drawing about 10 risky cards, implying the body was already showing signs of anxiety. This meant that their feelings were firing signals faster than rational thought, letting their gut reactions become the main influence in their decision-making. Maintaining the health of our gut is important not only for our overall physical health, but also our mental health, as it can influence our behavior. This is due to our gut bacteria, which is important for creating vitamins, assisting in digestion, and keeping pathogens from overriding our bodies and making us sick. The gut can communicate with our brain via neurotransmitters, which send key messages that impact our mood. Serotonin and dopamine are the best-known neurotransmitters generally associated with experiencing a good mood. The bacteria in our gut can make or consume these neurotransmitters, influencing our social behavior, anxiety, and depressive behaviors. Without healthy gut flora, it's possible that the correct number of neurotransmitters will not reach the brain. This will lead to variations in our emotions, ultimately affecting our gut feelings and potentially directing us towards suboptimal decisions. For instance, anxiety and depression are common symptoms experienced by those who suffer from chronic bowel problems. It's been observed that about 20% of those who live with inflammatory bowel disease expressed feeling anxious or unsafe for extended periods. When the disease flared up, this rate may rise to 60% or more. Should we trust our gut feelings? When comparing the results between going with one's gut feelings or rational, carefully considered choices, one would expect that rationale would win out over intuition every time. But this is not always the case. This is because our memories, experiences, learned information, and subconscious observations are influencing our intuition, even if we're not aware of it happening. This is why gut feelings can seem supernatural. Our senses are always working and feeding information to our brain. When we act on what we perceive to be pure instinct, we're actually following unconscious cues. For example, we might be mimicking the behavior of the people around us by avoiding a hazard that we had consciously observed being avoided by others. We might feel compelled to make similar choices to those around us when presented with a selection or vote. We may also have unconsciously observed environmental details that could be beneficial to us or potentially pose a threat. This is happening in the back of our minds at all times, and it is as natural as breathing. We're not cognizant of it happening. The same basic processes that use our innate observational skills to inform our intuition also use our memories and experiences to influence our choices. When faced with a new decision, our minds unconsciously recall relevant information that applies to the situation. As such, sometimes our gut feelings are actually predictions based on prior knowledge. Say that one of our friends invites us to see a movie. For some reason, we can't put our finger on, we really don't want to see that particular one. Unbeknownst to us, we'd read a poor review a few weeks prior and had since forgotten about it. But our unconscious mind was still able to use that information to influence our intuition. This sort of thinking happens automatically whenever we're faced with a choice. Our memories of information and emotional responses shape our future decisions. When our gut is wrong, the same mechanisms that create our gut feelings and enable fast, instinctive decision-making can also mislead us if we don't take the time to step back and think critically about the choices we're faced with. Our gut feeling could be an emotional response that's inappropriate or unwarranted. The subconscious information that our mind is accessing could be incorrect or outdated. Sometimes we need to ignore our initial instinct and consider all available information before acting. The nice thing about facts is that they're concrete and difficult to dispute. Allowing ourselves time to research and process the facts of a situation can allow us to make much sounder decisions than if we rely on intuition alone. This is especially true in areas with which we're less familiar. Intuition is already more prone to errors than critical thinking, which is exacerbated if we rely on emotional responses based on faulty information. We'll find that in these scenarios, even if going against our gut feels wrong, the facts will lead to better outcomes. Evidence-based decision-making is much slower than intuition, but if we have the time, it's often better to gather the facts than to just immediately go with our gut. This is because, as much as we may think it's not so, our minds are prone to bias when it comes to intuitive decision-making. Some examples of these are the anchoring bias, in which we rely on a single piece of information too strongly instead of gathering more data. Another is the bandwagon effect, in which we are influenced to think the same way a large group is thinking. There's also the clustering bias, which is our tendency to see patterns where, in actuality, there are none. The conservative bias rejects new information in favor of older information, and the recency bias does the exact opposite. Salience only takes in the most obvious points or features of a person or idea. And finally, stereotyping ignores the qualities of an individual entity in favor of overgeneralizations about similar entities. So, while using our gut may be useful in certain moments, weaknesses like these can often lead us astray. Two different systems of human judgment and decision, have been proposed. One is the FAST system, which may increase the chance of survival by allowing us to anticipate potential threats and recognize promising opportunities. However, due to the quick nature and inability to consider all options, this is more prone to error. The second system is a slower thought system, which engages critical thinking and analysis. This is less susceptible to allowed poor decisions. It's important to also recognize how the intuitive system can cloud or judgment in terms of decision-making. For instance, the framing effect, which tends to be influenced by the way a problem is posed, can lead to differing results depending on how the individual has interpreted the questions. For instance, a hypothetical question was proposed to a group of volunteers from two programs regarding how the U.S. should prepare for a disease outbreak that was expected to kill 600 people. Volunteers were split into two groups, where one group was told Program A would allow 200 people to be saved, and Program B allows a 1/3 probability that 600 people would be safe, and 2/3 probability that no one would survive. The second group was told, with Program C, that 400 people would die, and that with Program D, there's a 1/3 probability that no one would die, and a 2/3 probability that 600 people would die. Framing the alternatives in terms of the lives saved versus lives lost is what made the differences between the groups. Chances made in terms of gains, individuals were more often risk-averse, whereas when the choices were framed in terms of losses, individuals were more willing to accept these risks. Our gut is a powerful tool, but it's important to know when to use it and when we should take a more analytical approach. How to use our gut. A two-pronged attack is best to make effective use of our gut when making decisions. We need to prepare our mind properly to make our intuition faster and more accurate. However, we also need to be able to recognize when a more measured thought process would better serve the decision at hand, and when we do not currently possess the required information to choose effectively. The intuitive and analytical minds are at their most powerful when working in tandem. If we have a sense of the nature of the decisions that we'll be facing, we can arm our intuition appropriately by absorbing information that could end up being pertinent to those decisions. The more relevant information we have stored in our head, the more accurate our gut feelings will be as they draw on real data. For example, if a day trader diligently reads about the goings-on of a large variety of businesses and trade deals, he or she will have a greater sense of the overall trends of the market and would be far better served by their gut feelings if the opportunity to snap up a cheap stock comes their way. But no matter how much we prepare our intuition, evidence-based decision-making is almost always more accurate. If we have the luxury of time, the analytical approach is the way to go. We'll be able to recognize and account for whatever biases we unknowingly came into the situation with, and we'll be able to gather a sizable pool of specifically relevant information to inform our choice. Removing our emotional response from the equation dramatically reduces errors and improves results overall. Our intuition has the speed to help us choose and react quickly to keep us safe or give us an edge. Our analytical mind collects and considers evidence and keeps our emotions in check so that our decisions are based on reality and truth. When we learn where the strengths of each system lie and when and how we should use them, our decision-making will be much better as a result. Chapter 7, Neuroplasticity. What is neuroplasticity? For decades in our neurology study, the conventional wisdom surrounding the development, maintenance, and longevity of our brains was assumed to be preordained and linear. We were born with the set potential and healthy brain lifespan, and once we left adolescence, our brains ossified and began their inevitable decline. However, as research into neuroplasticity has progressed, and the focus shifted from the measurement of decline to methods of improvement and reversal, this conventional wisdom has changed. Neuroplasticity is now believed to continue throughout our lifetimes. Neuroplasticity is the ability of our brains to change as a result of our actions. We can engage in activities that keep our minds sharp and improve our memory, skills, and general well-being, regardless of how old we may be. This even applies to recovering from traumatic brain injuries such as strokes or physical damage to the brain sustained in adulthood, previously believed to be irreversible. We now know that the brain is an active and highly malleable learning powerhouse that will continually evolve throughout a person's entire life. How does it work? The brain is a complex beast, and therefore numerous interrelated processes are all in some way responsible for neuroplasticity occurring. The first one we'll discuss is chemical. In the preliminary stages of neuroplasticity, such as when learning a new piece of information or skill, chemical changes improve short-term memory and initial improvement of a motor skill. This is the first step in introducing true physical change in the brain and promoting healthy neurogenesis. The next grade up is structural change. Through repetition over a long enough period, the physical connections of our synapses strengthen, the same as if we were exercising a muscle. This is more closely related to our long-term memory and motor control and lasts a longer time than chemical change, although, like any other part of the body, it must be maintained. The final and most exciting aspect of neuroplasticity is functional change. This is when entire brain networks and pathways are restructured or created to serve new skills or purposes. These networks become easier to activate and more efficient the more they're used. And over enough time, they become semi-permanent features of the brain, so long as they're not allowed to atrophy. This can be observed in someone gaining new skills like playing an instrument or learning a new language. Also, it's the system through which someone with a traumatic brain injury can recover functionality over time as their brain rewires itself to compensate for the damaged parts. These three systems work in conjunction and allow our minds to be surprisingly flexible. New pathways are formed, old ones are discarded as new skills are gained, and obsolete ones are forgotten. This gives us the tools to learn, create, and stay healthy. Why is neuroplasticity important? The perception that our minds and thought processes are set in stone is a tough one to shake, but it is crucial to our well-being to recognize that our brains are constantly changing and are as susceptible to exercise or neglect as the rest of our bodies. Regular periods of stimulation and engagement are vital to keeping our minds performing at their best and remaining sharp well into old age. As our understanding of how neuroplasticity works continues to grow, the resources at our disposal to improve our lives grows too. Neuroplasticity is a relatively lengthy process, and as such, consistent effort and novel experiences are required to take full advantage of what the brain is capable of. But because of its near universal application, we can apply the benefits of neuroplasticity to many aspects of our lives. One obvious benefit of neuroplasticity is on age-related decline. While it was once assumed to be unavoidable, enough research has been done to unequivocally demonstrate the role of neuroplasticity in slowing this process and even stopping or reversing it. The chief criteria are a stimulating environment, new experiences, and challenge. Seniors participating consistently in new, engaging experiences have shown a marked decrease in decline as compared to previous studies year over year. They maintained a greater brain volume and showed improvements in their memory and overall cognitive abilities. They were also generally happier. In studies done with rats, encouraging neuroplasticity even improved their overall lifespan. Neuroplasticity allows us to live longer and fuller lives. Another important purpose neuroplasticity serves is to heal the brain after trauma. When a catastrophic event, such as a stroke or an accident, damages the brain, other parts of the brain can take over with the right training and reinforcement. During the initial trauma, the neurons associated with the functions that the damaged area of the brain control begin to die. After a short while, the brain begins forming new pathways and creating new synapses to attempt to replace what was lost. As this rebuilding and restructuring progresses, the brain is attempting to create new ways to access old skills and abilities. It's during this time that rehabilitation and therapy can be used to assist the brain in forming these new connections or accessing unused connections that have gone dormant. Through repeated and increasingly difficult tasks and practice, the brain regains the lost abilities through functional change. While injuries are horrible and depressing, they also represent a time in which the brain is the most capable of a rapid and drastic restructuring, which is at least a small silver lining. Lastly, And probably most importantly, neuroplasticity can be used to elevate our overall quality of life. Because of the ubiquitous nature of neuroplasticity in all brain function, it can be influenced by conscious actions that we take to improve nearly every aspect of our lives. Our memories and mental acuity can be strengthened over time. Our thought patterns and habits can be rewritten to support more healthy attitudes and proclivities, to the point of reducing anxiety and depression through sustained effort and redirection of negative thoughts. Training in a skill that activates several disparate portions of the brain at once, such as music or language, even has the potential to improve seemingly unrelated skills and abilities, as the complex network that needs to be created to facilitate such activities has a wide spectrum of application. Neuroplasticity gives every person the ability to improve and change if they're willing and able to put in the time and effort to do so. How to improve neuroplasticity? Now that we're aware of our brain's superpower, how do we better use it? This section should help us gain a better idea of what's required to encourage our mind to build new pathways and to keep improving every day. 1. Sleep. Sleep is incredibly important for healthy brain function and neuroplasticity. In studies done with mice, sleep deprivation resulted in a decrease in the functionality of the blood-brain barrier, which means less oxygen and nutrients were reaching the brain. Good sleep hygiene improves brain function and promotes neurogenesis. The role of sleep is theorized to reset and restore brain energy metabolism, as wakefulness consumes far more energy than sleeping does. Receiving a proper amount of sleep will keep our brain quick and flexible. It also encourages learning retention through the growth of dendritic spines that transform information across cells. We'll wake up better at a skill than we were before we went to bed. 2. Exercise. Exercise is always a good idea, regardless of the reason, but it also applies to neuroplasticity. People who partake in regular exercise have been measured to have a greater degree of neurogenesis than those who do not, and the volume and density of their brain matter is higher. Exercise keeps our mind in peak condition and prepares it to be challenged and improved. 3. Diet. No mind can function well without the right fuel. A balanced variety of nutrients and a proper level of caloric intake are critical to maintaining healthy brain function. Handled properly, dieting techniques such as intermittent fasting have even been shown to promote adaptive responses in synapses, promote neuron growth, and decrease the risk of neurodegenerative diseases. The right nutrient balance has also been theorized to decrease chronic inflammation, which has been linked to impaired cognitive function over time. 4. Challenge and novelty. When we set out to learn something, it should be as new and complex for us as it can be. New and challenging experiences translate to more pathways and greater structural change. To keep our mind evolving and growing, varied environments and activities are essential to keep ourselves stimulated and engaged. While practicing familiar tasks will strengthen the pathways we've already built, it is the novel ways in which we challenge ourselves that will do the most for us. 5. Intention and reward. Neuroplastic change is encouraged by the sense of fulfillment and accomplishment we receive from overcoming the challenges we've placed in front of ourselves. If we're not engaging well with the endeavors we've undertaken, the growth of new pathways and neurons will be severely stunted. Without a proper connection to the new activity, we'll be far better served by finding something that we do connect with rather than continuing to bang our head against the wall. 6. Specific attention and repetition. Bruce Lee once said, "I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks once, but I fear the man who's practiced one kick 10,000 times." This quote perfectly encapsulates the nature of neuroplasticity. The more precisely we focus on the tasks being practiced, we'll experience a greater degree of structural and functional change. This is due to the repetition required to cement the pathways and encourage their activation. A more specific task translates to a particular specific network being strengthened, and with time and repetition, that network will be running like a well-oiled machine. 7. Time. Generating new connections and restructuring our mind is not an instantaneous process. Depending on how complex our goals might be, it takes weeks, months, or even years to create and refine the intricate structures required to master a new skill. The most difficult part of utilizing our neuroplasticity is the consistency of repetition over time required to achieve meaningful results. It is quite easy to slip up, but if we manage to stay dedicated to our chosen skill, eventually our mind will rebuild itself around it. You'll be amazed at how far we can go. Neuroplasticity and decision-making. Neuroplasticity is such a widely applicable aspect of our brains that it can be used to improve just about any area of our lives. Therefore, we can bring its powers to bear upon our decision-making as well. By practicing mindfulness and consciously encouraging certain thinking and information processing styles as methods to lower our anxiety and stress levels, by focusing on creating pathways that encourage calmer thought and are less likely to be self-critical. Decision-making is a skill that can be improved like any other, and neuroplasticity is how we will get better. When aiming to achieve our ultimate goals, a few steps can help make this happen. 1. Admitting when we're wrong. The brain hates to admit failure, preferring to live in denial to keep us safe. This is why it's hard to make changes, because it goes against our ego by requiring us to admit our current method is not working. However, this hampers our building to improve ourselves, such as becoming more efficient at work that could lead to a promotion, or learn a new skill that makes daily tasks easier to complete. This can also hinder our ability to reduce our negative emotions and promote more positive ones. 2. Taking small steps forward every day. The best way to overcome our fears and procrastination is to take a small step every day towards our goal. Trying to get in shape? Start doing many workouts a few times a week. Trying to learn a new language? Find an online program to teach us to jump in whenever we have time. Every new taste of success results in a release of dopamine, which makes us feel and act happy. It also creates a save point in our brain when working towards learning something new. 3. Sharing our learnings. Another neurotransmitter that increases our mood is oxytocin. This is released when sharing our knowledge of our new skills with others and building trust. An increased release of oxytocin, alongside dopamine, can drastically lift our mood and increase our chances of overall success. If the small steps we're taking are working and making us happy, the logical decision is to continue along this path, right? 4. Visualizing our goal. A major step to being successful is to be able to visualize our ultimate goal. If we're not able to describe what it is we're working towards, how are our brains able to help us? We need to create a concrete image in our mind of us progressing towards our goals, being able to visualize, hear, and feel what being successful in this goal would be. This is an example of cognitive priming, whereby exposure to a particular stimulus influences a response to a subsequent stimulus without conscious effort or intention. By imagining our progress towards our goals and ultimately achieving them, while experiencing elevated moods through taking small, successful steps and sharing our learned knowledge with others, our decisions will shift strongly towards our desired outcomes and will be more inclined to continue chasing them. Chapter 8. Virtual Reality to Learn About Bodily Consciousness. I creeped slowly up to the corner of the cold, gray concrete tunnel I was making my way through. I peeked around the corner, but I quickly pulled myself back as a trio of menacing, cram-headed figures are lurching around in the open area ahead. Do they see me? I don't think so, but regardless, they are blocking my only way forward. They've got to go. I ready my trusty pistol and take aim as I step out into the light. The first creature lets out a strangled cry as it begins to stumble toward my position, alerting the others. Now, the fight is on. My aim is true, and my first shots strike the shambling thing dead center. But its resilient flesh absorbs the punishment, and it keeps coming. I remain calm and retreat into the hallway behind me. A few more shots and finally it drops. The other two are now nearly close enough for me to reach out and touch. But I'm ready. I pull my shotgun out and bring it to bear on the monsters as they raise their arms to strike. Two powerful blasts make short work of the grotesque things, and now they lay unmoving on the floor before me. It's safe now. The adrenaline slowly fades, and the tension leaves my limbs as I cautiously search the following rooms. I come across a well-equipped workbench hidden among the faded countertops and empty cabinets. Excellent. This will be my chance to improve and maintain my gear before pressing onwards. I'm just about to begin, but then I hear my cell phone ring. Suppose I should see who that is. So I reach out to put my pistol on the table in front of me, and my controller clatters embarrassingly to the floor, to the empty air in front of me. In the more rational recesses of my mind, I knew I was playing a video game, but the virtual world I was in was so convincing that the automatic parts of my brain forgot and began to treat it as real. This effect has been widely documented and recreated across the scientific world. Let's talk about some of what they've learned. How virtual reality fools the brain. Technology has allowed us to do amazing things as a species, and since massive computing power became more widely available and advanced, we began tests using virtual reality to explore the boundaries of our minds. The variety of available technologies with distinctive characteristics can be grouped into two categories: non-immersive and immersive virtual reality. Non-immersive virtual reality uses tri-dimensional environments created by computer-generated imagery, allowing us to explore in a virtual space. Immersive virtual reality involves a tri-dimensional environment with an immersive digital interface, such as virtual reality glasses or immersive projections. Since virtual reality entered the fold, surprising discoveries have been made regarding how easily our brains can be fooled using simulated environments and virtual bodies. They will often respond to virtual stimuli as they respond to true physical reality. Using this effect, virtual reality has been used in several therapeutic and experimental contexts, such as exposure therapy and embodied medicine. The current most popular hypothesis about why our brains can be so easily tricked by virtual reality is complex and astounding. It's known as predictive coding, which suggests that our brains are constantly running a simulation of our environment and our physical bodies to the end of anticipating expected input from our senses and reducing the likelihood of something unexpected happening, aka becoming surprised. Due to this framework of understanding, the brain has created from cataloged sensory motor experiences. The closer a virtual environment cleaves to what the brain expects, the more the brain will be fooled into believing that environment is genuine. This goes hand in hand with how well the virtual reality program being used responds in kind. Virtual reality reads the user's motions and predicts and reacts to what they do. This information provides the program with the necessary data to decide what sensory information is set back for the user's brain to interpret. Therefore, the closer the program is to being an analogous mirror to the brain's own simulation and expectations, the more the user will feel present in the virtual world. This is why we'll sometimes see immersed users accidentally punch walls or place something on a table that doesn't exist. The simulation was convincing enough to trick their brains into believing they existed within the virtual space. Embodied virtual reality. The same methods that can be used to fool a person's mind into believing that it exists in a virtual space can be further taken advantage of to create an experience known as embodied virtual reality, or the full body ownership illusion. This technique tricks the brain into believing that it occupies a different body, one with traits that may be far different from the body it actually inhabits. It's achieved by providing multiple sources of sensory feedback in conjunction with a virtual first-person perspective. In the studies done using these techniques, researchers observed a blurring of lines regarding the perception of self. The effect was greater or lesser depending on the number and quality of sensory signals, such as how realistic the environment or the skin looked, or if any sort of physical sensation accompanied the virtual body. These techniques can be further extrapolated to create a false sense of agency and control. Through the manipulation of external sensory input, combined with voluntary actions taken in the virtual body, certain involuntary actions taken by the embodied persona, such as speaking or walking, were perceived by their real-life counterparts' brains as their own actions. This was the case even when the real-life counterparts were silent or sitting down. These techniques open the door to a world of possibilities. The number and breadth of experiences it may be possible for a single individual to have and truly connect with are far greater than we could have imagined, all thanks to this technology. Embodied virtual reality for empathy and clinical use. The most exciting application for embodied virtual reality is as a clinical tool. There are a variety of treatments for behavioral disorders that were not possible before the advent of virtual reality. One such example is the promotion of empathy. Virtual reality allows us to occupy the bodies of those who are incredibly different from ourselves and live the kinds of lives we might not be able to ever truly understand without aid. Racial and ethnic boundaries could be crossed in ways that go beyond sympathy or ignorance. New cities, countries, and ecosystems could be visited and absorbed in ways that pictures and videos could never provide. In studies involving virtual reality experiences and their effect on empathy, there were noticeable decreases in implicit bias against marginalized peoples and increases in mirrored behavior and perceptions of similarity. Increased use of these techniques could create a greater mutual understanding between individuals or groups that may otherwise be struggling to connect. Another intriguing area is using virtual reality as a clinical device. Embodied simulations have demonstrated positive results when used to treat eating and waste disorders by using a virtual body swapping method to try to rewrite the brain's perception of itself and the body it inhabits. It's also been shown that similar techniques can be used as a non-pharmacological way of treating chronic pain. The reasoning behind this is that virtual reality can structure, augment, or replace the experience of the body by directly targeting the processes behind real-world behaviors. Entire new avenues for treatment may one day reveal themselves if research continues to be done. The potential of virtual reality. As it stands, virtual reality is still in its nascent stages. We do not yet know the extent of what this technology can achieve. However, the future appears bright as strides are being made both in the efficiency and power of the hardware and the intricacy of the programs available. Training methods can combine multiple abilities, modulators, catalysts, practices, and strategies that can be used to increase empathetic responses in the subjects. It will also give educators other avenues to explore when they're producing methods to assist learners in developing their skills for creating a more tolerant world. As this technology progresses, it may be able to help us all improve ourselves and gain a greater understanding of each other. This new method to help learn empathy will further improve our abilities to make better, more informed decisions that otherwise might not have been possible. Understanding the perspectives of our fellow humans broadens our understanding of the world, resulting in better decision-making. Chapter 9, The Role of Mindfulness. Mindfulness, or keeping one's attention on the current moment without overt judgment or emotion, is an ancient practice. It began 2,500 years ago as a derivative of sati, an important Buddhist tradition, combining that idea with Zen philosophy, vipassana, and Tibetan meditation techniques. There are many different methods and offshoots of this practice over the centuries, but in modern times, it was people such as John Kabat-Zinn, Richard J. Davison, and Sam Harris who codified and popularized its modern version. The current iteration of mindfulness has been used for various purposes, both on a personal, individual level and in the world of business and finance. The practice has been shown to have a wide range of benefits. It reduces harmful emotions like depression, anxiety, and stress. It improves physical aspects as well, such as weight management, athletic performance, and even healthy aging. However, the most relevant benefit to our discussion is the effect that mindfulness has on decision making. Those who practice mindfulness tend to make less emotionally driven, less risky, more rational choices. Let's find out why. The techniques of mindfulness meditation. There are several ways that mindfulness can be practiced, but every method is based on the idea of keeping our focus on the here and now. They're meant to promote a sense of self-awareness and observation of both our physiology and our state of mind. These are to be acknowledged and accepted without being judged as bad or wrong, simply observed. The goal is to take in these impressions with a detached sense of study, almost as if we are watching someone other than ourselves. One way of going about mindfulness meditation is known as watching the breath. Using this technique, we're supposed to sit in a chair or cross-legged on the floor and simply take note of the sensations of breathing or the rise and fall of our chest. We're not meant to attempt to slow or control our breathing, only to feel it and exist with those feelings. In doing so, we may find that our minds begin to wander, but we are not to become angry or upset that this has happened. We passively acknowledge that our mind has drifted away without judgment and then return our thoughts to our breath. Another common technique is the body scan method. This involves taking note of specific areas of the body and the things that these areas are experiencing. For example, we might start with the top of our head. We may be feeling a slight tug or tickle as a breeze moves through our hair. The breeze feels a little cool. Then we might move down to our neck. The muscles feel a little stiff and sore today. We feel them tense and twitch occasionally. We would make these sorts of observations for as long as we had decided to meditate that day. The final technique that we'll discuss here is focusing on sounds, sensations, thoughts, and feelings that occur in the present moment. In this method, we're not meant to refocus our thoughts on specific observations, but rather allow the present moment to proceed naturally and take in everything as it happens. These can be pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. It doesn't matter, as long as we remain in the present moment and accept what we observe without judgment. The goal of mindfulness meditation is to cultivate greater self-knowledge and wisdom. However, it's also demonstrated its ability to achieve positive effects in many areas of the mind and body. Mindfulness supports better well-being overall. Mindfulness and decision-making. As its popularity has grown over the decades, increasing studies have been done into mindfulness practices' influence on decision-making. There have been observed benefits in social and non-social contexts as mindfulness reduces emotional response and impulsivity in the practitioner's thought process. Mindfulness's chief role in social decision-making is in the assessment of fairness and the promotion of morality and altruistic behavior. Those who practice mindfulness will generally be more willing to accept deals and negotiations that are less fair to them in the service of preserving social interactions and maintaining positive relationships. This is because they are able to consciously regulate their emotions as opposed to reacting on impulse. This regulation of emotion similarly had a positive impact on decisions relating to morality and ethics, as practitioners were shown to be more likely to give up their seat to those in need and be more attentive to the needs of others in interpersonal relationships, such as boss to employee or partners in a couple. There's even been an observed reduction in implicit bias regarding age or race. In short, mindfulness has been shown to be an excellent way to reinforce pro-social behavior and increase social harmony. Mindfulness has shown how useful it can be in non-social decision-making as well. One area involves an individual's propensity for risk. Some are impulsive and willing to take on great risks without fully considering the consequences, while others are overly anxious and risk-averse. Mindfulness practices were shown to increase adaptive decision-making as the situation demanded. Long-term mindfulness has even been shown to help problem gamblers and drug abusers overcome their decision-making and behavioral dysfunction. Mindfulness also helps to curb our negativity bias, or our inclination to weigh negative information, events, and emotions more heavily than positive ones, regardless of how unwarranted they may be, and instead make a more balanced assessment of the situation. Another area in which mindfulness has proven effective is in mitigating the sunk cost fallacy, or our tendency to continue pouring resources into a poor decision due to the time, effort, or money already invested in a decision. Mindfulness effectively reduced the negative emotions tied into the situation and deviated the focus from the past and present towards the current moment. This had the effect of improving decision-making accuracy and mitigating the cost of mistakes. Overall, mindfulness practices are an excellent way to keep our stray thoughts and emotions from influencing us to make poor decisions and mistakes. If we stay focused on the present and aware of ourselves and the situation, distractions melt away in favor of clarity. Using mindfulness. So, now that we know a little bit about where mindfulness comes from and how it's used, how can we take advantage of what it has to offer? It certainly takes time for mindfulness practices to bear fruit, but what endeavor worth undertaking does not? Let's talk about some of the steps we can take to use mindfulness in our decision-making. Something to keep in mind is patience. The state of mindfulness will not come naturally to us right away. Most experts recommend starting our meditation time to be as little as 10 minutes. Later on, we can go for an hour or more with practice, but we should try to build ourselves up to that point. Another thing to keep in mind is to avoid taking any missteps too harshly and simply allow ourselves to observe and exist with them. The goal is not to feel upset, but rather to take in the world and ourselves as they are, rather than as filtered through our emotions and biases. We'll come to see how transient these moments are when we focus on the present. Over time, and through sustained practice, we should gain a better understanding of ourselves and increased focus on the present moment. We'll make decisions with clarity and empathy and less influence from our own negativity and stress. This should help us make better decisions and be more balanced in our lives and goals.